Welcome to this session that's looking at the link between eating healthily and dealing with COVID-19 and other illnesses. Hopefully some of you saw the drama that was streamed on Facebook just before this session. Well, it was also on the Zoom. If so, you might like to refer to it in any comments you might make. But it's not a problem if you haven't seen the drama and you're only signing in now. Also, you might like to download the free copy of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa's Barefoot Guide entitled Surviving COVID-19, The Neglected Remedy. Links to where you can download this will be put in the chat. To get us going in this discussion, we've asked Denford Namo to make some remarks on the topic, and then we'll go into an open discussion. Denford, or Denny as he prefers to be known, is a nutritionist with the City of Harare Health Department. He's a well-seasoned nutritionist with over 5 years' experience in the field of food security, dietary management of acute and chronic diseases, and nutrition, wellness, and education. So thanks very much for joining us, Denny. Over to you to make a few opening remarks. You're on mute.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. It's my pleasure to be on this show. And I really enjoyed the drama. It shows what's happening in the streets and the situation that people are facing. So, you know, the Zimbabwean diet was historically highly diverse and nutritious. However, over the past 5 or 6 generations, people in Zimbabwe have moved away from the indigenous foods to a heavy reliance on processed foods. You know, back then, people used to consume the unrefined foods. People used to consume, you know, our traditional foods, our wild foods, you know, but these days, you know, there's a transition that has been emerged. So today we will be talking about going back to basics, to our indigenous foods, our Zimbabwean diet. As a nation, we had experienced a nutrition transition from consuming our local indigenous foods to consuming these highly processed foods, which are high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt. And this has led to a double burden of malnutrition, where we now talk of undernutrition, which used to be our problem. But now we are also talking of overnutrition, where we have people who are overweight, where we have people who are obese. And this has led to other, you know, nutrition-related diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, cancers, and heart diseases. So when we talk about indigenous foods, these are the foods that have been consumed back then, you know, with people back then, and they are cultivated and produced locally. And most of them, they are wholly unaltered foods, which are organic and contain the highest levels of nutrients. They are not processed at all. And examples of our local foods found in Zimbabwe, we have our pumpkin leaves, which is mbora, we have our nyeve, we have our mowa, we have mushrooms. We also have small grains, that is rio, munga, mapunde. We also have our tubers, madumbe, magogoya, and wild fruits. So these are just some of the examples, you know, of these traditional foods. So like the rest of the world, Zimbabwe as a nation, we are also struggling from the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. And, you know, malnutrition and COVID-19 are linked together. Someone with undernourished, or I can say undernutrition, can exacerbate the effect and severity of COVID-19. While obesity as well, hypertension, and diabetes, all these diseases are related to nutrition, also have been linked to higher COVID morbidity and mortality. So all these are linked to the foods that we consume. Hence, there's need for us to talk about healthy foods, healthy eating, especially going back to basics, you know, consuming our traditional foods. So these are my welcome remarks. Over.
Great, thanks so much, Denny, for that. And it's wonderful to hear a nutritionist working with the City of Harare talking like you're talking. which is exactly in tune with what this traditional and organic food and seed festival is all about. We want to bring, it's about bringing back traditional seeds and traditional diets, but it's also about moving forward. It's not about, sorry about that, it's not about going backwards, it's about moving forwards. So let's open it up now to some discussion. And I think what really interests me and something we might like to discuss a little bit is, given the important role that eating healthily can play in dealing with COVID, and there may not be huge amounts of direct evidence, but loads and loads of common sense is telling us this. Given that, why is not more emphasis put on eating healthily? I mean, for example, the WHO is not really putting a lot of emphasis on eating healthily, for sure. And we agree, and within AFSA, we agree that the other actions need to be taken into account: washing hands, sanitizing, getting vaccinated, but these are all short-term solutions. The longer-term solution is very much linked to diet, with COVID-19 and with many, many illnesses. And it just seems such a pity, but also I think it's an opportunity to push or to encourage people to eat more healthily in future to deal with COVID-19 and other pandemics that could easily come along. So any thoughts, any reflections from anyone as to why this is not being given more emphasis? But that's just one question. You might have other comments as well that you'd like to make. And we have welcomed Peter. Peter Gubbels was one of the writers on the Mini Barefoot Kite, which the drama was based on, and which you can download free from the website. Any reflections? I'm sure, Stacia, you'll have something. In Tando, you're a food activist. Any reflections on this topic of eating healthily and dealing with COVID-19?
John, may I ask a question?
Please do, go ahead.
I apply this to Denny. I'm, of course, strong promoter as one of the authors of Eating Healthily. But I'm just wondering, in the context of Zimbabwe, that we emphasize traditional diets. And yes, of course, traditional diets are more healthy usually than the processed foods and so on. But as far back as 1988 until today, stunting in Zimbabwe has been always over 30%. That means 1/3 of all children are, well, as you know, stunting means cognitive and physical damage. I'm just wondering, how do we reconcile, thinking about traditional diets in the Zimbabwean context and the benefits of that with still quite high, I would say 31 is about the African average, but still it's unreasonably high. It should not be there. How do we explain that? Of course, now we have obesity and other types of malnutrition, but I'm just wondering about the stunting and the traditional diets and how we can interpret that.
Great, thanks, Peter. Peter's in Ghana. He lives in the north of Ghana. So I could say lots on that, but I'm sure others could as well. Ntando, Denford, other Zimbabweans. Would you like to respond to Peter's question? How this ongoing stunting that one finds in Zimbabwe is a shocking figure that is from the Ministry of Health. How is that explained in relation to eating traditional diets or not? Any reflections for Peter, who's in Ghana? Yes, go ahead, Denford. Your hand's up. Unmute and go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, our stunting rate is very, very high. 31% is very high. But apparently, with stunting, we have many factors that contribute to stunting, especially for our case in Zimbabwe. We can also look at exclusive breastfeeding rates. It's still we are not yet there where we want to be. So you would find out that with stunting, we can only correct it within the first 2 years of life. So that's where we encourage mothers to exclusively breastfeed for the first 6 months, as well as to continue with breastfeeding up until 2 years. But if you would see from the statistics or from the surveys that have been done, you'd see that most mothers, they win earlier. Maybe they also don't really practice exclusive breastfeeding, and they don't breastfeed up until 2 years, of which we say breast milk is also important. It contributes to the good health and good nutrition of a child. And also, we also have issues to do with wash, issues to do with hygiene, issues to do with diarrheal disease that are caused maybe by not having safe water. So we also have other contributors that are contributing to stunting, which we are working on addressing. So linking it with our traditional diets, yes, we encourage them, to consume these traditional foods, even when they are, especially after 6 months, where we recommend complementary foods, where we say breast milk is no longer enough, only they also have to consume other foods. We tell them if you can prepare porridge using, millet and all that. We encourage them to prepare mahewu, that is the African drink, so that they can give to the under fives. But you see that as far as we put those efforts, we also have to put efforts on other factors like exclusive breastfeeding, as well as the wash component. So yeah, those are other contributors. That's why our stunting rate is always high.
Great, thanks for that, Denford. Stacia? So Stacia's in Malawi and probably also got high stunting rates, I would imagine.
Yeah, we do. I wanted to add maybe one or two things to the last answer and maybe a question back to Peter. With research that's been done recently, they're finding other windows of opportunities besides the 0 to 2. Of course, before you get pregnant, working with young families to help them understand what to grow by eat. But also there's a window of opportunity during adolescence, during growth spurts. They find a lot of catch-up growth in that age range as well. So there are other ways to address stunting. I'm wondering why Peter asked the question. I'm trying to think at history as I know it from Malawi. I can't speak so much for Zimbabwe. We have addressed some of our stunting issues in the last 20 years, but if you look back further than that, eating traditional diets brought people a lot more animal foods, fruits, more of the diversity that we're trying to get people sort of to go back to. John, like you said, not go backwards, but bring those foods forward. So I see it as a solution to enhancing diets. I think a lot of the problem has been knowledge, that people weren't sure what to do with foods. We didn't need to change the foods. We just needed to help people use the foods they have in a better way. There are a lot of myths about feeding children here. And those are some of the things that we had to address more than switching to a foreign food, because that's somehow going to miraculously cure us. It's the traditional foods themselves that are often richer in nutrients. So Peter, I'm curious about a little bit more behind your question. Thanks.
John, if I could just reply very briefly, I don't, there are many other people and they likely have questions. First of all, I want to make absolutely clear that of course, healthy eating, healthy diets, diverse diets are essential for good health and good nutrition. To answer your question, Stacy, why do I raise it? It's because I've been a promoter for many years, as you have been, of you in terms of permaculture, myself in terms of agroecology. And in the areas where people are practicing agroecological food production, I don't see that there's been a significant improvement in anemia and in stunting and in other forms of malnutrition. Now, there are many reasons, as Denny has mentioned, it's linked to WASH and breastfeeding and nutrition education. But I just want to say that it is something that within the agroecology movement, and this is why I contributed to that, the book about COVID, is to raise awareness that just because we're producing food in an agroecological way does not mean that some of the key aspects of nutrition, good nutrition, are addressed. And that's the reason. And then I just happened to look up the data for Zimbabwe and found out that it is the case there. So even though we emphasize traditional diets, as we should, I'm not at all criticizing that, I'm promoting it, doesn't mean that that's enough. We need to look at other things within the agroecology movement. And in linking nutrition to agroecology, it's more complicated than just producing the good food. So that's why I raised it. And I'll stop there. John?
Great, thanks, Peter. And I agree with you fully. I mean, I think we've got to look at those other factors as well, and not just presume that if one produces agroecologically, that people will eat agroecologically, eat in a diverse way. But just to say a little bit more about Zimbabwe, because you talked about the 80s. So since in the early 80s, the government, with the best of intentions, basically promoted the Green Revolution here and was extremely successful. And the smallholder farmers took over the bulk of maize production from the commercial farmers. And in the process, became kind of monocrop maize growers in many of the high potential areas of Zimbabwe. I remember visiting a farmer in Makoni district in the late 80s, it was the early 90s. She was a woman farmer, and she got the idea that I was interested in diverse foods. And so she took me to her field, which she said she kept hidden from the agricultural extensionists, because they didn't like all that diversity. They wanted farmers to get into real production, and real production meant growing maize because maize equaled food. And unfortunately, I think that's also from a purely eating point of view, I think that's contributed hugely to the dietary problems in Zimbabwe, is this whole thing that maize equals food. And it contributes to obesity, and I'm sure it contributes to the malnutrition as well. But that's not to say that there aren't other factors as well. So anyone else? Ntando, you have such a nice story about your own daughter and eating healthily. I wonder if you wouldn't like to share that, or a perspective on traditional diets and why does Zimbabwe have high stunting rates, or anything like that. Ntando? Can I put you on the wire, on the mic? I'm not sure if Ntando's there. Any other thoughts from others? Welcome, Edward.
Hi.
Go ahead, Ntando. I'd love to hear what you think.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. I have a bit of noise in the background. That's why I was hesitant to put on my hand up. I think that it's a combination of many factors, one of which is what John has just said. Government has promoted monocropping and provided inputs. I feel saddened when government subsidized inputs are purely hybrids and encourage monocropping. And you have farmers getting awarded for being the best in doing these monocultures within communities, and even eating habits then follow suit. The second point, I think, is around the mindset. For many different reasons, most Zimbabweans especially in the rural areas, that the moment they step into cities or step into supermarket or something that is new and foreign, I personally think that there is an instant thinking that what we have, what is ours, what we know is inferior to what is new and foreign. And so you find most youngsters preferring to go for takeaways from fast food shops. And you also see a lot of young mothers, those who can afford going for foreign or processed foods at the expense of what is readily available. And I agree with Peter, growing agrologically doesn't necessarily translate it to a healthy meal, but I think it's a critical starting point. And I therefore like this food movement that is growing, but also that it points people back to what is affordable and what can be shared within communities, given that still more than 60% of the Zimbabwean people are in the communal areas and they have access to some land that they can produce for sale. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ntando. And I think you're so right on the mindset issue. It is extraordinary how what a part that mindset has played. I also remember visiting it was also actually in Makoni, but many years later, visiting a community. It's an area where some of you might know John Nzira, who's been involved in this for many, many years, where he is working with communities. And they'd started recently working with one particular community. And part of it was helping them recognize the value of traditional foods. And I remember going to a kind of a field day that they held where they were displaying their foods and their seeds and so on, and how they shared their story that even in that rural area, they had started shifting out of these traditional foods. They didn't see them, they saw them as low status. They weren't linked to being modern. They weren't about being developed and moving forward, and how they suddenly realized that relatives in town were not healthy, were getting diabetes. And so what John Nzira and his team were saying to them about eating badly, causing some of these things like diabetes, started to make sense to them. And they had shifted back to eating their traditional foods and were really celebrating it and were saying, well, why did we go away from these in the first place? It's ridiculous. So I think that mindset issue is extraordinary in the way it affects people. Denny, please go ahead again. Your hand is up. You're muted, Denny, you're muted.
Okay, thank you, John. So, I concur with the point that is pointing out to issue to do with the mindset. With food patterns, it all have to do with behavior change. We are wired to sadza. We want our sadza. If someone doesn't eat sadza, they will say, I didn't eat anything when I went to bed. It's only when they've eaten sadza, when they will consider that they've eaten something, especially for supper. So it all has to do with the behavior change. In our setup, when you eat those traditional foods, it's related by being poor. It's related to poverty. Say, you eat nyeve, or you eat this kind of vegetable, or you eat maybe sadza made of millet. It's related to poverty. It's like you don't have enough money to buy good food, of which that's the food that is healthier. So it all has to do with the behavior change, and we have to put more efforts in, in educating our communities, in educating our societies. I was also thinking even in incorporating it in our curriculum, in our, in our syllabus to the school-going children, so that it sticks in their heads, and as they grow up, they know that this is also healthy. It's actually more healthier. And another point is that we have vigorous and rigorous marketing of unhealthy foods. If we had also the same marketing for our traditional foods, we could have been somewhere. We could be talking about something else. You can just take a look of how these fast foods are advertised on TV. If we could have the same advertisement being done for our traditional foods, it could go a mile, you know. And another thing we should also look at, maybe at policy level, is that the government should also subsidize you know, growing of these whole grain foods, these traditional foods, they should also subsidize. I can just give an example of command farming, where people or farmers are given inputs, or Fumbudza, where farmers are given inputs to grow maize. If we could also have the same concept being done or implemented to our traditional foods, to our, you know, whole grains like millet, sorghum, so that we have them in abundance. Because these, if you go into the supermarkets, they are very expensive. It's because of scarcity. Whenever we have scarcity, and the prices will be high. So if we have them also being subsidized and we have them in abundance, it also tells to the cost of it, and many people can afford to buy the traditional foods. You know, again, you can just go in supermarkets like TM, and you compare the price of brown rice, that unprocessed one, and you can compare with the price of the white rice. You'd see that the white rice is cheaper, the brown rice is expensive. It's because it's in scarcity. Not many people are producing it. So government, maybe at policy level, we recommend or advocate that they should also subsidize, you know, growing of these whole grains and these traditional foods.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, so agroecological inputs, supporting that rather than supporting the chemical inputs that governments do so much of and spend so much money on. Certainly, that's another area that various organizations are trying to promote. So I think there's many thrusts and prongs that have to be pursued in order to bring these changes about. But hopefully there's a turning point. And I must say, I think that COVID has been a disaster in many ways for many people, but I do see that a silver lining of it is an opportunity to start turning the tide. And funnily enough, our Barefoot Guide, which we produced, has been most successful, most spread in Mexico, where they've translated it into Spanish and had more facilities to spread it. And they picked up on it. A big organization there called Conabio. And they're using it to influence policymakers, influence all sorts of people, and use COVID as an opportunity to shift diets. It's one of the unfortunate things I heard the other day, that some of these healthy foods have a poor status to some extent because of being linked to HIV/AIDS, so that they were promoted as part of as good nutrition for HIV/AIDS. So there's this kind of almost stigma that has been attached. Apparently, this is what I heard by other people. So it's a complex topic, that's for sure. Eating is a complex topic. But the thing is, and that's what we try to do in the Mini Barefoot Guide, is that it's actually not that complicated to get back to healthy eating. The actual eating side of it, the sort of guidelines to eat well. But there are all these complex issues that surround the topic. But I think the tide is turning. And this Food and Seed Festival is all about celebrating our traditional and organic food, so that it's not all bad news. There's lots of good news, and I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we're turning a tide now, and I think more and more people will jump onto this wagon and start eating healthily and recognize and celebrate traditional foods. It's so important. Any other reflections from others? Any other questions you'd like to throw out onto the table, or a burning question that's going around in your mind? Welcome to some people who have just joined us now. Any thoughts? We've got 8 more minutes before we have to close and move on. Edward, I'm sure you've got Makoni. I'm sure you've got one or two reflections. Can I put you on the line and ask you what your thoughts are? Why are we not putting more effort? Why isn't more effort being put on healthy eating in relation to COVID, for example?
Thank you, John. Thank you. And
you're very faint, Edward.
Thank you, and greetings to everyone. I would respond by saying to those that are on this call right now, what have we eaten today? And what does it reflect on what we are preaching? So I think everything else begins with us, and we need to then see ways and even advocate when we are pretty sure that ourselves are converted and are eating healthy. The coming in of COVID-19 should not be seen as a blessing in terms of people at least getting to traditional foods, but it should really signal how far we are from achieving what we want to have, in also having the word across communities. So what I feel should be done really is more on, when I joined, someone was talking about a mindset. That one is a big, it's a huge battle, which will be very difficult to continually talk about, because mindset, it can be the whole generation which requires that kind of change. But what we are saying here is, let everything begin with me. What have I eaten today? What is it that I am reflecting to the person next door, to my children and everyone else? And if we are then clear of ourselves and what we want to achieve, then we can say, okay, now we have got COVID-19. What can we say about what we are eating and the healthy lifestyle that we intend to see in the communities, among the people and everyone else? And when we do that, then maybe we can start really talking. We have got quite a number of organizations. It's interesting to see how this kind of, it's evolving really. Things are changing. We don't need to look at the pace at which things are changing. If we have got 10 organizations in a district or in a province that at least are working towards ensuring that the message gets across to the people, that's a plus. And when we then get to the program areas for those particular organizations, let's ask ourselves again, how many people at least now understand? And the moment we start taking stock of the way we are moving, then we can say we are achieving what we want. And really, it's good that we are at a time when people at least are getting the message directly or indirectly because of COVID-19. And we must then look at ourselves to say, to what extent are we making sure everyone else understands? My family understands. When I go back into the villages where I belong, what do the people say? And where are we having challenges? Yes, people, our children are used to ice cream, are used to these fast foods. We cannot say they are wrong. No, they are not wrong for now, but how can we help them then also take these traditional foods, these, healthy eating habits moving forward? Thank you very much, John.
Great, thanks, Edward. And you're so right to remind us that it always starts with us, each of us individually. What are we doing? How can we play our part to move in this direction. So I've been given a message that we need to round up now because the next item on the festival agenda is about to start. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, particularly to Denford Namo for joining us, but to all of you for having joined and taken part in this discussion, which I think has been live streamed as well, and the film of it will also be available, so others may watch it then. So thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival virtually, and most of them, well, certainly Stacey and Peter can't join us, but most of the others, maybe Ntando's in Bulawayo. So, but remember, and please tell others that the physical festival is taking place on Saturday at the Botanic Gardens in Harare. There'll be lots of healthy foods to buy at reasonable prices, lots of seeds. There'll be a whole seed display. There'll be lots of music, different Zimbabwean music, and there'll be a kids zone for kids to have fun. So as always, there'll be a wonderful day for the family with the focus on traditional and organic food and seeds. So thank you so much, everybody, and see you next time. So now we'll end the meeting. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.